So for my homemade sauerkraut, you really only need two ingredients: green cabbage and a sea salt or whatever salt you use that's non-iodized. So for slicing, I'm going to show you three different methods. One is a mandolin slicer, and the traditional method is a knife, and here you see a hand slicer or grater with little teeth, and that's meant to make it extra fine. So I do sometimes use that. It takes extra time, but if you want a really fine sauerkraut, you can use something like that. So what you want to do is core your cabbage. I don't core it as deep as I would if I made cabbage rolls, which is a previous video. I just kind of do a shallow cut and take off the kind of the upper part of the core. So just be careful, use a sharp knife and a stable surface. You want a medium to large cabbage. You want to make it worth your while because it is a bit of work to cut and make sauerkraut. So they usually go on sale this time of year in the fall, so it's a good time to make it. So what I do is I push down on the knife with my other hand and I go straight through, and I go through again. Sometimes it takes a few tries depending on the thickness of the cabbage. Okay, and you want to quarter your cabbage, cut it in 4 pieces. Again, just push down on the top of the knife, and this one was fairly easy to cut through. I've had worse. Keep your extra leaves for later. So this first method is the hand grater and slicer. As you can see, it's a bit messy, but it does create quite a fine strand of cabbage. So it's whatever you prefer, but this does actually take more time and it does kind of clog up a bit, but I have used it. This is my least favorite method, is the mandolin, just because ours is not very good. If you have a longer mandolin and a little bit bigger, it's a lot easier. Obviously use a hand guard. For this one I wasn't, just because of the size of the cabbage piece, but always use that hand guard for when you get down to when it's smaller. So this is my preferred method. What I'm doing is just kind of shaving the edge of the cabbage. I have the flat side down on the board. You have to have a nice stable surface, nice sharp knife, and you're just kind of shaving off as thin as you can get it. Now don't worry if some are bigger than others or you have larger chunks, because that will all get broken down later. I'll show you that during the crushing process with your hands, and then during fermentation it also shrinks. So just try to get as thin as you can. Just go along. So each quarter you're doing this. And occasionally your knife is going to slip a bit, but just keep your fingers curled back and away from the blade. And then this is important too, to separate everything, because sometimes it will stick together. So clear off your work surface so you can continue on. I have a medium-sized bowl, and then I empty that one into a larger bowl, and one entire cabbage will fit in a very large bowl. So I just continue on. Here you can see the largest bowl, and I will empty that in and continue on. So what you're doing here is just kind of going through, and you're looking for pieces that you need to finish off and cut up properly. You'll get the odd chunk here and there, not a big deal. You're looking for consistency. Again, it will all get broken down later and it will shrink. So here you see some leaves and other odd pieces that I'm just going to cut up in strands. Keep your fingers kind of curled away from the blade. Take your time. So set aside a few hours to do this. It's not something you can do in half an hour. And you are going to make a mess, so you'll have pieces of cabbage in your kitchen, probably on the floor as well. Maybe not in the ceiling, but on the floor. So here I'm just weighing my bowls, and what I always do is write on the bottom of my plastic bowls the grams. That helps if you forget to weigh it and you already have product in your bowl, then you know what the weight of the bowl is. But in this case, I'm just going to tare it and add 1,000 grams or 1 kilogram of cabbage to each of those bowls. So here I am weighing it out. And I'll show you why I use 1,000 grams. Now when you're using your salt, don't use a coarse salt. You want either medium or fine grind salt, just because the coarse will take too long to break down. So there's my second bowl, 1,000 grams. And the remaining cabbage is in the large bowl. So you can see the final weight there. And I know from previously weighing my bowl, it's 360 grams. So I subtract that and I have 757 grams. So for every 1,000 grams of cabbage, you want to add 1 tablespoon of fine sea salt. And here I'm just demonstrating that it's roughly 18 to 20 grams. It's going to be a little bit different for every type of salt, but generally you want to use fine or medium sea salt. I've used pink sea salt, Himalayan. In this case I'm just using regular fine sea salt. You want to add that to the bowl of cabbage. Again, 1,000 grams. So first I'm kind of moving the salt around to kind of get into the lower part of the bowl. Do that first. And then you start crushing the cabbage. So you're breaking down the cell walls. And you'll see that just by doing that for a few minutes, you reduce the actual volume of the cabbage by at least half, if not more. So it takes a bit of effort to kind of crush. And I just kind of keep rotating the bowl and crush and continue on. And that helps to work the salt in, and it's going to release a lot of the juice and the water from the cabbage, which becomes your brine. So at no point in this recipe do you add water to this sauerkraut. You want to just use the natural juices from the cabbage itself. So the salt will help to draw out that along with your crushing. So again, for every 1,000 grams of cabbage, you use 1 leveled off or slightly rounded tablespoon of sea salt or kosher salt. So don't use iodized salts or Epsom salts. Stick to something that works well, like sea salt. Iodine will interfere with the fermentation process later on, so we don't want to use anything that's iodized. Here I'm adding the 1 tablespoon. I don't weigh it, I was just demonstrating that, so I know that 1 tablespoon is what I need for every 1,000 grams of cabbage. I've sped it up a bit. So there you can see it's reducing in size. And I'm just combining them into one bowl. So because I had 757 grams, that's about 3/4 of a kilogram, so I did 3/4 of a tablespoon. So that was pretty easy to work out. You don't have to be exact. They say a 2% brine, 2% salt solution is appropriate for fermentation. So you don't want to over salt, but you want to have at least 2%. This is the method I use to determine that, and it works every time. So as you can see, we had 3 bowls, and now we're combining into 1 bowl. We've done our mixing and crushing. I'm going to cover it up, and I'm going to let it sit for 2 hours. You can let it sit for 1 hour, but the longer the better. It draws all the juices out. And you'll see that just by letting it sit that long, it creates its own brine. So that's why you never add water. You're just going to use its own brine to help it ferment. So I'm just demonstrating here how much comes out, and then I can set that side off, that bowl off to the side, and I can add that brine as needed, and whatever's in the bowl itself with the cabbage. So let's move on to the filling of the jars. I had wide mouth jars. Most of them were used for the tomato sauce I made, so I didn't have many, but you'll see I used some larger jars as well. So just start filling your jars. This is kind of the messy part. You'll end up getting it all over the place, but just take your time. Push it in through, either use a funnel or you can just have the open jar and do it that way. Obviously have clean hands during the entire process here. And then you want to use something to push it down with. So this serves two purposes. Obviously you want to pack it in as best you can into the jar, and then you can add more. But later on, you're going to be pushing it down to get all the air out of the jar too, because fermentation is an anaerobic process. It doesn't, it can be hindered by any oxygen left in the jar. So you really want to get all the air bubbles out. So by compacting it later on, and you'll see that in a minute, you reduce the chances of anything going wrong during fermentation. So just take your time and press it down and keep compressing. And you can see all the air bubbles coming up from the bottom. So as long as they come up to the top, you're fine. They're going to dissipate. But you don't really want any air bubbles left in the lower part of the jar. So you've made more room, now you're going to add more cabbage, and you just continue on. And you can see how much brine is created just by that 2 hours of having that salt draw out the juices in the water. And on occasion you're going to have almost too much brine, and you're going to have to pour off some of it, like I'm doing here. And I have glass weights because I've done this quite often, and it was worth the getting these glass weights. But there's other methods which I'll show you in a minute. So I'm going to wipe the edge, make sure it's clean and there's no stray cabbage. And then I have vented lids that I use. But again, there's other methods. But it's good to invest in, if you do this quite often, fermenting any vegetable, you can buy these products as well. It really helps. It's much easier. So I'm just going to continue on. This is a narrow mouth mason jar. But same process, push everything down. You'll see the brine come up. Then add more cabbage. Now I'm going to show you a different way of, if you don't have those glass weights, what you can do is you have a piece of cabbage left over. So you want to, if you don't have glass weights, you want to make sure that you have extra cabbage on hand to do this. So the old school way is kind of sometimes to put pieces of larger chunks of extra cabbage, or even part of the core, on the top like that, because the main thing you want to do is keep all your strands of cabbage underneath the brine. You don't want it exposed to oxygen. The other method is to have a Ziploc style bag, partially fill it with water, push the air out and seal it, and then you have like a little bladder of water in a bag, which you can place on top, and that helps to push everything under the brine. So as you can see, just by having that on top, it keeps everything submerged and no oxygen is reaching that cabbage. You always want to just do hand tight. You don't want to crank that on because it does have to vent. Sometimes people will burp them, which just means once a day you just want to loosen that lid. This is called a pickle pipe. has a little hole in that nipple portion there, so that's how it self-vents. So that's another method. But yes, I have the self-venting lids, which I love because you basically put them away and they self-vent and you don't have to worry about it. So I just continue on here. You guys get the idea. If you need to add brine, as you get towards the end of your cabbage, sometimes you kind of run out of brine in the bowl, but that's why sometimes I pour some off to the side. Remember to get all the air out. And I did use some 1.9 liter jars, so larger jars that I had to use because I ran out of the other ones during the making of tomato sauce. So I used basically 3 different sizes of jars here. So if you run into a situation where you can't fill a remaining last jar, you just use the rest of your brine, push it down, get all the air bubbles out, of course. And then what I would do is use another bag with water, get all the air out of it, and this is going to be used kind of as a weight to keep everything underneath the brine, okay? So fit it in there, wipe the rim off and place your lid on. Again, don't tighten it too much, and there you go. And the final step is to let the cabbage ferment for anywhere 2 weeks to 20 days. 20 days is ideal for me. Gives you that traditional sauerkraut taste. Make sure you have a tray underneath your jars and then maybe in the basement because it does off-gas a bit. So enjoy your sauerkraut, and it's not too hard to make. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and bye for now.